Cole, get in the truck, now.
Margot Reyes didn't wait for an answer. She grabbed Adrian Cole by the collar of his $3,000 jacket and yanked him off the ridge just as the wind changed. A second later, the entire tree line exploded into a roaring wall of fire. "That's impossible!" Cole stumbled backward. The fire was 4 miles east. The app said, "The app is wrong." Margot shoved him into the truck and slammed the door. Fire doesn't read apps. She'd been flying for Adrian Cole for only 11 days. In those 11 days, she'd learned the one thing most likely to get him killed. He trusted data more than people. Today, that mistake was about to cost him everything. Smoke rolled over the ridge like a living monster, swallowing the road behind them in seconds. Margot threw the truck into reverse. She couldn't see the old logging trail anymore, but she remembered every turn. Branches slammed against the truck, ripping both side mirrors clean off as she drove straight into the smoke. "Where's the helicopter?" Cole shouted, gripping the dashboard so hard his knuckles turned white. "Half a mile behind us," Margot answered, never taking her eyes off the trail. "We're not making it back." "What do we do?" "There's a creek bed 200 yards south, wet rocks. Nothing there to burn." "You want to wait there, Margot? That fire is coming right at us." "I know exactly what it's doing." Her voice never shook. "But if you want to live, stop talking." The truck skidded to a stop. Margot threw open her door. "When I count to 3, she looked straight at him. "You run. Don't look back. Don't stop, no matter what you hear." Cole stared at her. For the first time since he'd met her, he realized she wasn't guessing. She already knew how this fire behaved. What Adrian Cole didn't know, what nobody at Cole Dynamics knew, was that Margot Reyes had stood in front of a wildfire only once before, 2 years earlier. It was the day her younger brother Danny walked into the flames as a firefighter and never came home. She had failed to save him once. She wasn't going to fail again. 3. Margot grabbed his arm. "Run!" 11 days earlier, neither of them knew this mountain was about to change both of their lives forever. Quick pause. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your country in the comments. I read every single one. If you're loving this story, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Trust me, you don't want to miss tomorrow's episode. It goes way deeper than this. Margot Reyes was 34 years old, 6 years out of the Air Force, and currently unemployed in the specific way that meant she still had a pilot's license, but no airplane attached to it. She'd spent 4 years loading cargo onto C-17s in places she still wasn't allowed to talk about at dinner parties. Came home, got her commercial rating, and spent the 2 years after that flying crop dusters over almond orchards in the Central Valley for an outfit that paid her in cash and complaints. Then the outfit lost its biggest contract, and Margot lost her job, and she was sitting in a diner outside Redding, California, reading a job posting on her phone that made absolutely no sense. Private pilot needed. Remote property access. Trinity County. Must be comfortable with rough terrain landings, irregular hours, high net worth household. Helicopter experience a plus. Discretion required. The pay listed was 4 times what she'd made dusting almonds. She almost didn't apply. The word discretion always meant somebody was hiding something, and Margot had spent her whole life around people who hid things. The Air Force taught you that lesson early, that the people who needed the most discretion were usually the ones who'd done something that needed hiding. But her truck payment was due, and her apartment in Redding had a mold problem the landlord refused to acknowledge, and 4 times the pay was 4 times the pay. She drove the interview in her own truck, a 15-year-old Tacoma with 200,000 miles on it, up a private road that wound through the kind of forest you only saw in calendars, until it opened up onto a ranch property so big she genuinely couldn't see the edges of it. A main house, built mostly out of glass and steel beams, sat at the center, looking less like a home and more like something that had landed there by accident. A man in a flannel shirt that was trying too hard to look casual met her at a gravel turnaround that doubled as a helipad. Early 40s, tired eyes. The kind of haircut that cost more than her truck payment. "Margot Reyes?" he said. "I'm Adrian Cole." She'd half expected an assistant to do the interview. Most rich men she'd met sent someone else to do the looking people over part. "You're doing your own hiring?" she asked. "For this one, yes." He looked past her at the truck. That's a long way to drive for an interview that might go nowhere. I figured if it went nowhere, at least I'd seen the mountains. Something flickered behind his eyes. Not quite a smile, but close. Come look at the helicopter, he said. Tell me what's wrong with it. It wasn't a normal interview question, and Margot understood immediately that it wasn't supposed to be. She walked the length of the Bell 407 parked on the pad, running her hand along the tail boom, checking the rotor mast, popping the cowling without asking permission first. Took her 4 minutes. Your hydraulic reservoir's reading low, she said, straightening up. Not dangerously low, but somebody should have caught that on the last service and didn't. Cole's jaw tightened, just slightly. The maintenance company swears it was full Tuesday. Then either the maintenance company's lying, or you've got a slow leak nobody's tracking yet. I'd want it looked at before anybody flies this thing again. You're the 4th pilot I've interviewed this week, Cole said. You're the first one who opened the cowling. The first 3 were probably worried about getting their hands dirty in front of the boss. Are you not worried about that? Margot wiped her hand on her jeans. I spent 4 years loading cargo onto aircraft that other people's lives depended on. I learned a long time ago that looking good in front of the boss gets people killed. Looking at the actual aircraft keeps them alive. Cole studied her for a long moment, the same way she'd studied the helicopter. You were Air Force. 4 years. Loadmaster. That's not a pilot's job. No, she agreed. I got my ratings after I got out. Crop dusting first. You learn more about flying low and fast over unpredictable terrain doing that than you do in most flight schools. Then I came up here for the money, if I'm being honest with you. I appreciate honesty, Cole said. Most people who come up here tell me they came for the mountains. The mountains are nice. The money's why I drove 3 hours. That finally got the smile out of him. Small, surprised, like it hadn't been used in a while. The job's more than ferrying me to meetings, he said. I split time between 4 properties this time of year. This one, a place outside Weaverville, an office in Reading, and a cabin up near the Trinity Alps my son likes. Fire season makes some of those routes complicated. I need someone who isn't going to panic if conditions change fast. Define fast. 2 years ago, a controlled burn 3 ridges over got loose, and we lost visibility on the Weaverville route for 6 hours. I had a contractor stuck up there who couldn't get out by road or air. Cole's voice didn't change pitch, but something underneath it did. I don't want that to happen to my son. Ever. Margot felt something she recognized but didn't examine yet. A small, cold echo of a different mountain, a different summer, a phone call she still heard sometimes when she couldn't sleep. What's your son's name? She asked instead. Eli. He's 15. He flies with me more than I'd like, given how he feels about seatbelts. Cole almost smiled again. You'll meet him if you take the job. I haven't been offered the job yet. You opened the cowling, Cole said. You've got the job if you want it. She wanted it. She needed it. She told herself that was the only reason her hands felt unsteady on the drive back down the mountain. The relief of solving a problem. Nothing more. Nothing about a 15-year-old kid who flew too casually with seatbelts. Nothing about a man who said ever like a promise instead of a hope. The first 2 weeks were almost peaceful, in the specific way that fire season pretends to be peaceful right before it isn't. Margot learned the rhythm of Cole's world the same way she'd learned the rhythm of a flight line a decade ago, quietly, without announcing she was paying attention. She learned that Cole Dynamics had made its money in agricultural drone technology, and that the company's newest division was buying up burned and burn-adjacent land across 3 counties at prices that made the local ranchers furious and grateful in equal measure, depending on which side of the sale they were on. She learned that Cole's business partner, a sharp, smiling man named Desmond Park, came up from the Bay Area every Thursday and always left looking like he'd won an argument nobody else remembered having. She learned that Eli Cole was smarter than his father gave him credit for, and angrier about something he wasn't saying out loud yet. And she learned, slowly, the way you learn the layout of a building before a mission, which radio frequencies the local fire crews used, and which ones somebody else seemed to be listening to as well. She didn't say anything about that part. Not yet. Eli noticed her first, in the way teenagers notice the people adults don't bother explaining themselves to. You don't talk like the other pilots, he said one afternoon, leaning against the helicopter while she did her pre-flight. He was technically not supposed to be on the pad without supervision. He was technically not supposed to be a lot of things, based on the eye rolls his father gave him. How do the other pilots talk? Like they're trying to convince my dad they deserve to be here. Eli shrugged. You just check the helicopter like nobody's watching. Nobody needs to be watching. The helicopter doesn't care if I'm convincing anybody. It cares if the bolts are tight. Eli considered that with the seriousness of a kid who didn't get a lot of straight answers from adults. My dad says you were in the Air Force. 4 years. Did you fly planes over there? Wherever there was? I loaded the planes other people flew. Big difference, even if people don't always think so. Is that why you check everything so carefully? Because something happened? Margot looked at him for a second too long. He had his father's eyes, but none of his father's careful, managed exterior. Eli's face still showed everything he was thinking, which made him either refreshing or dangerous to be around, depending on the day. Something happened to somebody I loved, she said finally, surprising herself with how much truth came out. Not over there. Here. A fire. 2 years ago. He was a firefighter. I check everything carefully because I've seen what happens when somebody doesn't. Eli didn't say I'm sorry, which she appreciated more than she expected to. He just nodded slowly, like he was filing the information away the careful way kids do when they're deciding whether an adult is finally being honest with them. My mom died when I was 11, he said. Car accident. Dad doesn't talk about it. He just buys more land. It wasn't really a complaint. It was an observation, delivered flat, the way kids deliver the truths that adults spend years learning to soften. That sounds lonely, Margot said. It's fine, Eli said, in the tone of someone who had said it's fine enough times that the words had worn smooth and stopped meaning anything. Then, almost as an afterthought, you're the first person he's hired who actually looks at me when I talk. Margot didn't have a quick answer for that one. She went back to her pre-flight, and Eli stayed leaning against the helicopter a while longer, and neither one of them said anything else. But something had shifted slightly in the air between them, the way it does right before a fire jumps a ridge nobody was watching. It was a Tuesday evening, 18 days into the job, when Margot first noticed the delay pattern. She was running the flight log the way she ran every flight log, out of habit more than requirement, cross-referencing scheduled departure times against actual departure times, looking for anything that didn't match the maintenance records she kept on her own laptop instead of trusting the company's shared drive. 3 times in the last 2 weeks, a water bomber contract flying out of the regional airstrip 12 miles from the ranch had been delayed by exactly the same amount, 40 minutes. Once for a mechanical inspection that wasn't on any service log she could find. Once for crew availability, on a day when she'd personally seen the crew sitting in the break room doing nothing. Once for weather hold, on a day with a clear blue sky from horizon to horizon. 3 delays, same airstrip, same 40 minutes. Same contractor handling ground operations, a company called Ridgeline Aviation Support, which, as far as Margot could find, had been registered 8 months earlier and had exactly one other client listed anywhere. A land-holding company she recognized, because she'd seen the name on 3 different parcel filings Cole Dynamics had been buying up that summer. Once is nothing, she told herself. 3 times is a pattern. She didn't bring it to Cole that night. She wanted to be sure first, the way she'd always wanted to be sure, before she said anything that couldn't be unsaid. She got her chance to be sure 4 days later, on the worst day of the fire season so far. The Pinecrest Ridge fire started from a lightning strike nobody disputed. That part was real. That part was nature, doing what nature does in August. What happened after the lightning strike was the part that started keeping Margot awake at night. She was flying Cole and a county planning commissioner named Hal Whitfield out to the Weaverville property for what was supposed to be a routine site visit, when the radio lit up with the kind of chatter that made her stomach drop before her brain had even finished processing the words. Pinecrest Ridge, 6 miles north of their flight path, had jumped from 40 acres to 400 in under 2 hours. CAL FIRE was scrambling air support, and the water bombers that should have been in the air within 20 minutes of the first call were sitting on the tarmac at the regional airstrip, grounded by Ridgeline Aviation Support for an unscheduled safety inspection. 40 minutes, the same 40 minutes, every single time. Margot banked the helicopter hard, watching the smoke column rise on the horizon, like something reaching upward on purpose. "Cole," she said, her voice flatter than she meant it to be. "I need you to look at something." Can it wait? Hal's got a meeting in. It's about the fire. Cole went quiet. Whitfield, in the back seat, looked between them with the particular stillness of a man realizing he was about to learn something he hadn't been invited to learn. There's a company called Ridgeline Aviation Support, handling ground ops at the regional strip, Margot said. They've delayed water bomber dispatch 3 times in 2 weeks. 40 minutes, every time, for reasons that don't hold up if you actually check the paperwork. They're doing it again right now. That fire could have been contained at 40 acres. It's not anymore. That's a serious accusation, Whitfield said. It's an observation, Margot said. I haven't accused anybody of anything yet. I'm telling you what the timestamps say. Cole's face had gone the particular gray of a man doing math he didn't want the answer to. Ridgeline, he said. Desmond brought them on, said the old ground crew was overpriced and underperforming. How long ago? 8 months. The same 8 months the company had existed. Margot felt something cold settle into her chest. The same feeling, she realized distantly, that she'd felt 2 years ago standing at the base of a different mountain, watching a different fire burn longer than it should have, waiting for a brother who never came down. I need to see the land filings, she said. Every parcel Cole Dynamics has bought or is trying to buy that touches anything within 5 miles of where these delays have happened. Why does that matter? Whitfield asked. Margot didn't answer right away, because the answer was forming faster than she wanted it to, and she needed to be sure before she said it out loud. Because a fire that burns longer than it should, she said finally, burns land that's harder to dispute the value of afterward. Burned land sells cheap. Cheap land gets bought fast, before anybody asks too many questions about why it burned the way it did. The cabin went silent except for the rotor noise. Below them, the smoke column kept climbing, indifferent to all of it, the way fire always was. Get us to the strip, Cole said. Now. What they found at the regional airstrip 30 minutes later wasn't an unscheduled safety inspection. It was 2 water bombers sitting fully fueled, fully crewed, going absolutely nowhere, while a Ridgeline Aviation Support supervisor named Kurt Draeger stood by the hangar doors checking his phone like a man waiting for a text message that mattered more than the fire 6 miles away. Margot recognized the posture immediately. She'd seen it before in cargo holds halfway across the world, the specific stillness of somebody who'd been told to wait for exactly this long and not 1 minute longer. She landed the helicopter on the access apron without asking for clearance, which earned her a furious wave from a ground crewman she ignored completely. Mr. Draeger, Cole said, walking toward him with the kind of calm that Margot was beginning to understand wasn't calm at all, just a very expensive version of barely holding it together. Explain to me why my water bombers aren't in the air. Draeger's eyes flicked to Margot, then back to Cole, and something in his expression shifted from irritated to careful. Safety inspection, Mr. Cole. Standard procedure. We don't cut corners on... What's the inspection finding? Margot asked. That's not really... What's it finding? Margot said again. Specifically, right now, out loud. Draeger's jaw worked for a second. There's a possible hydraulic irregularity on the lead aircraft. We're being cautious. Margot walked past him without asking permission, climbed the access ladder on the lead water bomber, and was back down in under 3 minutes. There's no hydraulic irregularity, she said. I checked. This aircraft is fully operational and has been sitting here doing nothing for 35 minutes, while a fire that should have been contained at 40 acres is now pushing 500. She turned to Cole. Somebody told him to hold these aircraft on the ground. I'd bet my license on it. Draeger's face had gone the color of old paper. I don't know what you're... Who told you to hold them? Cole's voice had finally lost its careful management completely. Kurt, who? The radio on Draeger's hip crackled before he could answer, a dispatcher's voice cutting through, tight with the specific urgency that meant things had gotten considerably worse in the last 90 seconds. Pinecrest Ridge fire has crossed Highway 36. Repeat, fire has crossed the highway. Evacuation order issued for Forks Creek and surrounding residences. All available air support requested immediately. Forks Creek. Margot's stomach dropped through the floor of the airstrip. That was where the volunteer fire station sat. The same kind of station her brother Danny had worked out of, 2 years and 40 miles away, on a mountain that had also burned longer than anybody could explain at the time. "Get those aircraft in the air," she said, already running back toward the helicopter. Now, whatever this man was told, it doesn't matter anymore. People are about to be in that fire's path. Cole didn't argue. He didn't ask questions. He just turned to Draeger with an expression that promised a very different conversation later, and ran for the helicopter behind her. They lifted off into smoke that had gone from a column to a wall, the kind of fire weather that turned the sky the color of a bruise and made the whole world smell like the inside of a chimney. Margot flew low along the ridgeline, scanning for the access road that fed into Forks Creek, her hands steady on the controls in the specific way they always went steady at the worst possible moments. The rest of her anything but. "There," Cole said, pointing. A handful of vehicles were strung out along the evacuation route, moving slower than the fire behind them was closing the distance. And past them, cut off from the main road by a finger of flame that had jumped faster than any model should have predicted, was a single structure that Margot recognized with the kind of clarity that made the whole world go very quiet for a second. A volunteer fire station, lights still on, one engine still parked outside it, and at least 2 people visible on the ground who weren't moving toward any of the evacuation vehicles at all. "They're trapped," Margot said. "That access road's gone. They can't drive out. Can you land near them?" Margot was already calculating. The same fast, 2 steps ahead calculation she'd learned to run under pressure a decade ago and never quite managed to retire. "There's a gravel lot behind the station. Tight, but I can put us down if the wind holds. Do it." She didn't ask if he was sure. She'd learned in 3 weeks of working for this man that when his voice dropped into that particular register, he already was. The landing was the hardest thing she'd done in 2 years. Wind sheer off the ridge fighting her the whole way down, visibility dropping to almost nothing in the last 50 feet, the heat from the approaching fire line pressing against the windscreen like something physically pushing back. She put the skids down 8 feet from where she'd aimed for, which she would later consider, privately, one of the better landings of her career. 2 firefighters scrambled aboard, a woman in her 20s with a radio still clipped to her vest, shouting something about a third person still inside checking the station's water pump, and an older man whose hands were shaking too badly to be useful for much of anything except holding on. "There's one more," the young firefighter shouted over the rotor noise. "Hank, he went back for the pump controls. Said he could shut the line down before it caught." Margot was out of her seat before the sentence finished, sprinting toward the station through smoke that stung worse than anything she remembered. Worse even than the day she'd stood on a different mountain waiting for Danny. She found Hank exactly where the firefighter said he'd be, bent over a pump control panel that had nothing left to save, coughing too hard to run on his own. "Time to go," Margot said, hauling him upright by the arm. "The pump is replaceable. You're not. Move." She got him out the door and across the gravel lot just as the fire line reached the edge of the structure behind them, and for one suspended second, running through smoke with a stranger's weight against her shoulder, she was 26 years old again, on a different mountain, except this time, she got there in time. They lifted off with 4 extra souls aboard a helicopter rated for 2, smoke pouring off the skids, and Margot didn't fully let herself breathe until the gravel lot, and the fire station, and the wall of orange behind it had all shrunk to something small enough to fit in the rearview mirror. "Everyone's out," she said into the headset, mostly to herself. In the back seat, the young firefighter, her name turned out to be Casey, was staring at Margot with an expression somewhere between gratitude and disbelief. "Who are you?" she asked. "I'm the pilot," Margot said. "That landing wasn't a pilot's landing," Casey said. "That was a special operations landing." Margot didn't answer that. Cole, in the front seat beside her, was watching her with an expression she didn't have time to fully read. Something that looked like the moment right before a man asks a question he's been holding back for longer than he realized. He didn't ask it yet. There wasn't time. But 3 minutes later, when the radio cut through with the call Margot had been half expecting and fully dreading since the moment she saw Hank Draeger's careful, waiting posture by that hangar door, the question was about to become considerably more urgent than either of them was ready for. "All units be advised. Pinecrest Ridge fire has breached containment lines on the northeast flank. Repeat. Breach confirmed northeast flank. Origin of breach under investigation. Possible secondary ignition point identified approximately 0.2 miles from primary fire line. A secondary ignition point. 2 years ago, on the mountain that took her brother, investigators had found exactly the same thing and never managed to explain it. Margot set the helicopter down at the regional airstrip with her hands steadier than the rest of her felt. 4 passengers climbed out into a crowd of relief workers and county officials who'd assembled faster than seemed possible, the way emergencies always pulled people out of nowhere. Casey, the young firefighter, squeezed Margot's arm once before she got swallowed into the chaos. "Find me later," she said. "I want to know how you fly like that." Margot didn't answer. She was already watching Cole, who had gone very still beside the helicopter, staring at his phone. "Kurt Drager's gone," he said. "Not arrested, gone, just gone. Ridgeline's office in Reading isn't answering, and the company's registered agent address comes back to a UPS box. Convenient timing," Margot said. "Too convenient." Cole looked up at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, the careful, managed exterior he wore in every meeting and every interview had genuinely cracked. "Margot, I need you to tell me something honestly. Do you think I caused this? Even without knowing it, did my company set this fire in motion?" It would have been easy to say no. It would have been kind even. But Margot had built her whole life on the difference between kind and true, and she wasn't about to start blurring that line now, not with a fire still burning 6 miles away and a dead brother whose case had never closed. "I think somebody connected to your company delayed the response to a fire that should have been contained," she said. "I think that same somebody has been delaying responses for 2 weeks in a pattern that lines up with land your company is trying to buy. Whether you caused it depends on whether you knew. I don't think you did. But somebody around you did, and I intend to find out who." Cole absorbed that the way a man absorbs a diagnosis he already half suspected. "Desmond," he said. "He brought Ridgeline on. He's been pushing the land acquisitions harder than anyone else on the team. He flies up every Thursday like clockwork." "When's the next Thursday?" "Tomorrow. Then I want every land filing your company has touched in the last 8 months on my desk before he lands," Margot said. "And I want to know exactly which parcels sit inside today's burn perimeter." She didn't sleep that night. She sat at the small kitchen table in the guest cottage Cole had given her on the property, modest by his standards, which still made it nicer than anywhere she'd lived in the last 6 years, and went through 8 months of land filings with the same patient, methodical attention she'd once given to manifest logs that determined whether cargo planes stayed in the air or fell out of the sky. The pattern, once she let herself see the whole shape of it, was almost elegant in its simplicity. Coal Dynamics, or more precisely, a subsidiary called Ridgeline Land Partners that Margot hadn't even known existed until tonight, had quietly acquired options on 14 parcels over the past 8 months. 12 of those parcels touched land that had burned, or was currently burning, in fires that had each been delayed in containment by roughly the same window of time. 40 minutes here, 45 there. Once, alarmingly, a full hour. And every single delay traced back to ground support contracted through Ridgeline Aviation Support. Same name, Ridgeline, hiding in plain sight, the way the worst secrets always did. She pulled a second folder out of the bag she still hadn't fully unpacked in 6 weeks of living out of her truck in a guest cottage. The folder she carried with her everywhere, the one she hadn't opened in nearly a year. Danny's case file. The fire investigation report that had never produced an answer. Just a stack of unexplained variables and a secondary ignition point investigators had flagged and then quietly dropped when funding ran out and nobody with enough power cared to push harder. She laid the 2 sets of documents side by side on the kitchen table. The new acquisition map, the old fire report. And there it was, the thing she'd been half afraid of finding since the moment she'd heard the words secondary ignition point over the radio that afternoon. A parcel number on the new map, dated 8 months back, that bordered the exact ridge where Danny's fire had started 2 years before Ridgeline Land Partners had even existed under that name. Different company name back then. Same registered agent address. Margot sat very still in the quiet of the cottage. The harbor lights, no, Not harbor lights, she reminded herself. Wrong story, wrong life. Just porch lights and a half moon over the ridge, doing nothing to soften the cold certainty settling into her chest. Whoever had been buying burned land 2 years ago, under a different name, had been doing it again this summer. And if that was true, then Danny's fire hadn't been an accident any more than today's was. She didn't call Cole that night. She wanted to be certain first. By morning, she was. Desmond Park arrived by helicopter at 11 a.m. sharp, exactly the way Cole had described. Thursday clockwork, expensive sunglasses, a smile that looked rehearsed even when nothing required rehearsing. He shook Margot's hand on the helipad with the brief, categorizing look of a man deciding she wasn't worth remembering. "You're the new pilot," he said. "Heard you had quite a day yesterday. Very dramatic." "4 people are alive who wouldn't be otherwise," Margot said. "I wouldn't call that dramatic. I'd call it Tuesday." Something flickered behind Park's sunglasses, there and gone too fast to name. "Adrian inside?" "Waiting for you," Margot said. "So am I." That last part clearly wasn't supposed to be part of the meeting, based on the half-second pause before Park recovered his smile and walked toward the house like a man who hadn't just been told something he didn't like. Cole was waiting in the glass-walled office that looked out over the ridge, 3 monitors open, the particular stillness of a man who'd been awake most of the night, doing exactly what Margot had been doing, reading documents he wished said something different. Eli sat in the corner of the room on a stool, arms crossed, uninvited and unmoved by anyone's suggestion that he leave. Margot noted that and said nothing. Some conversations, she'd decided. A 15-year-old boy whose mother died in an unexplained accident had every right to sit in on. "Desmond," Cole said, without preamble. "Tell me about Ridgeline." Park's smile didn't move, but something behind his eyes recalculated fast. "Ground support contractor. I brought them on 8 months ago because the old vendor was bleeding us on costs." "What's this about?" "It's about the fact that Ridgeline Aviation Support delayed water bomber response on 3 separate fires in the last 2 weeks, all of them touching land that Ridgeline Land Partners has options on," Margot said. "Same name. I'd ask if that was a coincidence, except coincidences don't usually involve identical registered agent addresses going back 2 years, under a different company name, attached to a fire that killed a firefighter on a ridge 40 miles from here." The room went very quiet. Eli uncrossed his arms. Park's smile finally fully disappeared. "That's a serious accusation to make without proof." "I'm not making an accusation," Margot said, and meant it the same careful, technical way she always meant it. "I'm describing a pattern of documented facts. Whether those facts add up to an accusation is something a prosecutor can decide. I'm just the pilot who noticed the timestamps didn't match the paperwork." "Margot." Cole's voice had an edge to it she hadn't heard before, somewhere between warning and plea. "Is this connected to your brother?" Eli's head turned sharply toward her. Park's expression shifted into something more careful, more calculating, the look of a man recalculating exactly how much this woman already knew. Margot hadn't planned to say it here, in front of Eli, in front of a man she was increasingly certain had helped engineer the death of someone she loved. But there wasn't a version of this conversation anymore where she could keep it separate. "My brother Danny was a firefighter," she said, her voice level even though nothing underneath it was. 2 years ago, he died on a ridge that burned longer than it should have, with a secondary ignition point nobody could ever explain, on land that got bought up cheap 11 weeks after the fire went out. "I came up here for a flying job. I didn't come up here looking for this. But I'm not walking away from it now that I've found it." Park's jaw tightened. "I had nothing to do with a fire 2 years ago. I wasn't even with this company yet." "No," Margot agreed. "But your registered agent was. Same UPS box, same shell company structure, different name on the door. I'd be very curious who else was involved back then. Mr. Park, and whether they're still involved now." For the first time since she'd met him, Desmond Park looked genuinely rattled, the smooth corporate composure cracking at the edges like dry paint. "I want my lawyer present before this conversation goes any further," he said. "That's your right," Cole said quietly. "But understand something, Desmond. If what Margot's found is real, I will burn this entire partnership to the ground myself, before I let it touch my company's name. I built Coal Dynamics to leave something to my son. I will not leave him a company built on someone's death. Park left without another word, his helicopter lifting off the pad 20 minutes later in a hurry that told its own story. Eli looked at Margot for a long moment after the rotor noise faded. "Your brother," he said quietly. "Is that the something that happened to you? The thing you told me about?" "Yes," Margot said. "I'm sorry," Eli said. And this time it landed differently than the empty version usually did, because his eyes were wet and he didn't try to hide it. And Margot understood that this 15-year-old boy, who'd lost his own mother to an unexplained accident, understood exactly what she was carrying, in a way most adults never would. "Thank you," she said, and meant it. The investigation moved fast after that, the way things move once enough money and enough motive finally line up where someone with the right resources can see the whole shape of it. Cole brought in his own legal team within hours, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney named Priya Anand who'd handled corporate fraud cases for 2 decades, and looked, Margot thought, like she ate conspiracies for breakfast. The shell company 2 years ago was called Tallgrass Holdings, Priya said on a call the next morning. Sharing her screen with documents Margot recognized instantly. Half of them matched pages from Danny's case file she'd kept for 2 years, without anyone else ever looking at them seriously. Same registered agent as Ridgeline Land Partners. Same accountant, actually, which is the kind of mistake people make when they think nobody's looking closely enough to notice. Who controlled Tallgrass? Margot asked. That's where it gets complicated, Priya said. The ownership traces through 2 other holding companies before it lands on an individual, a man named Walt Draeger. Margot's stomach dropped. Draeger. Kurt Draeger's the supervisor who held the water bombers on the ground yesterday. Walt's his father, Priya said. Retired forest contractor. Lives outside Weaverville. Spent the last 15 years quietly accumulating burned land options through a network of family members and shell companies, then selling the cleaned-up parcels to developers once the controversy died down. Desmond Park appears to have discovered the strategy 2 years ago, decided it was profitable, and built Ridgeline as version 2 of the same playbook, with Kurt running ground operations for both generations. A family business, Cole said, built on arson. We can't prove arson yet, Priya cautioned. We can prove pattern, financial motive, and obstruction of emergency response. That's enough to open a criminal investigation. Arson takes forensic evidence at the ignition point, which means somebody needs to get out to that secondary ignition site from yesterday's fire before the investigation team clears it, and before anyone connected to Ridgeline has a chance to disturb it. I'll go, Margot said. It's still an active fire zone, Cole said. Margot, that's not... I flew Hank Draeger out of a burning fire station yesterday, Margot said. I can fly a forensic investigator in to look at a cold spot today. I'm not asking permission, Adrian. I'm telling you what I'm doing, because I think you'd want to know before it happens, not after. Cole studied her for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted from concern into something that looked almost like recognition. You sound like someone I used to know, he said. My wife talked like that, before. It was the first time he'd mentioned his wife unprompted. Margot didn't push it. She just nodded, and let the moment sit there between them, the way some moments needed to sit, before anyone tried to explain them. I'll have a CAL FIRE investigator meet you at the strip in an hour, Priya said. Margot, be careful. If Walt Draeger finds out someone's headed to that ignition site before his people can get there first, you're not just investigating a fire anymore. You're investigating people who've spent 15 years making sure nobody investigates them successfully. Margot had spent 4 years loading aircraft in places where careful wasn't really a choice. It was just the baseline cost of staying alive. She didn't need the reminder. But she appreciated it anyway, and she kept it in mind exactly 31 minutes later, when she noticed the same dark green pickup truck she'd seen idling outside the Reading airstrip 3 days earlier, now parked at the edge of the access road, leading toward the Pinecrest Ridge burn site. Engine running, driver's seat occupied by someone who very clearly wasn't waiting for a fire investigator. Margot brought the helicopter down on a flat stretch of scorched earth 200 yards from the access road, far enough that the rotor wash wouldn't kick up ash into anyone's evidence. close enough that she could see the green pickup truck clearly through the haze still hanging over the burn site. The fire itself had moved on, chewing its way north into the wilderness area, leaving behind a landscape that looked like the moon. Gray ash, blackened trunks, a silence that pressed against her ears in a way that the noise of an active fire never did. The forensic investigator riding with her was a quiet, broad-shouldered woman named Renata Cho, who'd spent 15 years with CAL FIRE's arson unit and had the unhurried calm of someone who'd seen every kind of human stupidity a fire could expose. "That truck shouldn't be here," Renata said, following Margot's eyeline. "This whole sector's supposed to be closed to civilian traffic until we clear it." "It's been here since before we landed," Margot said. "I saw it 3 days ago outside the Reading airstrip. Different plate, same dent in the tailgate. You remember dents in tailgates? I remember things that don't belong somewhere twice. That's a thing happening 3 times now, counting today." Renata didn't ask any more questions about that. She just radioed her position to the incident command post, the way procedure required, and started walking toward the ignition site with her kit slung over one shoulder, moving like a woman who'd learned a long time ago that hurrying never helped and noticing always did. Margot followed half a step behind, eyes on the truck the whole way. The driver hadn't moved, didn't roll down a window, didn't get out, just sat there with the engine running, watching them the way a man watches something he can't stop, but wants on record that he tried. Secondary ignition point should be right about. Renata crouched at the edge of a blackened depression in the earth, brushing ash away with a gloved hand, with the kind of careful precision Margot recognized from her own work checking aircraft. "Here, you see that?" Margot crouched beside her. Underneath the surface ash, the burn pattern looked wrong in a way she couldn't have named before this summer, but understood instantly now. The way you understand a forged signature, even before you can explain what tipped you off. "That's not lightning." "No," Renata agreed. "Lightning strikes don't leave pore patterns. This is an accelerant signature, and it's old enough that whoever set it knew the main fire would burn through this exact spot eventually and cover their tracks." She pulled out a small sample kit, working with the unhurried focus of someone collecting evidence she already half expected to find. "I need to bag this before that truck's owner decides to do something about us being here. How long do you need?" 20 minutes, if nothing interrupts me." "I'll make sure nothing does," Margot said, and started walking toward the truck before Renata could tell her that wasn't part of the plan. The driver rolled the window down when she was 20 feet out, which told her he'd decided confrontation was less risky than continuing to sit there looking guilty. He was older than she expected, 60s, weathered, with the particular leathery toughness of a man who'd spent his whole life working outdoors, and the particular wariness of a man who'd spent the last 2 years hoping nobody would ever ask him the questions Margot was about to ask. "This is a closed fire zone," he said. "You folks shouldn't be out here without clearance." "We have clearance," Margot said. "CAL FIRE investigator, badge and all. You, on the other hand, are sitting in an idling truck at the edge of an active arson investigation with no obvious reason to be here. Walt Draeger, I presume." His face didn't change, but his hands tightened on the wheel. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do," Margot said. "I think you've been driving out to check on burn sites for 15 years, ever since the first time this worked for you, because some habits are hard to give up once they've made you rich. I think you're sitting here right now hoping the wind kicked up enough ash to bury whatever your son's people poured into that ground 2 days ago. And I think you're about to be very disappointed, because the investigator 20 yards behind me just found exactly what you're worried about." Walt Draeger's jaw worked silently for a few seconds. Then, instead of denying it, instead of driving away, he did something Margot hadn't expected. He laughed, short and bitter, the sound of a man who'd run out of road to keep pretending on. "You think this is about getting rich?" he said. "You have no idea what this land was costing me before any of this started. 15 years ago, the county wouldn't approve a single permit on my contracts unless I went through 3 different inspectors who all wanted their hand greased first. I found a way around all of it. Burned land doesn't need permits from men who want bribes. It just needs time and a buyer with patience. A firefighter died on the mountain you burned 2 years ago," Margot said, her voice dangerously quiet now, The careful, level tone she used right before the part of her that used to load cargo onto warplanes took over completely. His name was Danny Reyes. He was 28 years old. He had a sister who spent 2 years wondering what really happened up there, and you're telling me it was about permits? Something in Walt Draeger's face finally cracked, the leathery toughness giving way to something smaller and more human and considerably less defensible. "I didn't know anyone was up there," he said, and for the first time his voice lost its certainty. "The burn plan said the area was clear. I never wanted anybody hurt. I just wanted the land. You set a fire you couldn't fully control, on a ridge you didn't bother confirming was empty," Margot said. "Wanting isn't the same as not being responsible." Behind her, Renata's voice carried across the burned clearing, sharp with the kind of urgency that cut through everything else. "Margot, I've got the sample. We need to move. Now. Incident Command's reporting a flare-up on the northeast flank, and it's moving toward this position fast." Margot looked back at Walt Draeger one more time. "You're not driving away from this," she said. "Not this time. There's a federal investigation opening within the hour, and your son already burned through whatever credibility this family had left when he ran instead of answering questions yesterday." She didn't wait to see whether he believed her. She turned and ran back toward Renata, who was already shoving her sample kit shut and scanning the horizon where a new column of smoke had begun curling up against the gray afternoon sky, closer and faster than anything that should have been possible, given yesterday's containment lines. "That's not natural fire behavior," Renata shouted over the rotor noise as they sprinted for the helicopter. "Somebody set that." Margot didn't need her to finish the thought. She was already running the math, the same fast, 2 steps ahead calculation that had saved 4 lives yesterday and was about to need to save 2 more right now. Because the new flare-up sat directly between them and the only safe flight path back to the airstrip, and because Walt Draeger's truck, she noticed with a cold drop in her stomach, was no longer parked where it had been 30 seconds ago. He'd gone somewhere, and given everything she now knew about how this family operated, somewhere probably wasn't anywhere good. The helicopter cleared the new flare-up with less margin than Margot would have liked to admit out loud, banking hard over a ridge that hadn't existed as an obstacle 20 minutes earlier. Smoke rolling beneath the skids close enough that Renata, white-knuckled in the back seat, finally broke her professional composure enough to ask the question Margot had been waiting for. "Is it always like this with you?" "Today's actually been pretty good," Margot said. "Nobody shot at us yet." "That's a low bar." "It's the bar I learned to clear first. Everything after that's a bonus." They landed back at the regional airstrip to find Priya Anand waiting on the tarmac with her phone already pressed to her ear and an expression that told Margot the last 90 minutes hadn't been quiet on the legal front either. "Kurt Draeger's been picked up trying to cross into Oregon," Priya said, ending her call. "Border Patrol flagged his vehicle on an outstanding warrant Desmond Park's lawyer apparently filed this morning, trying to get ahead of the story by throwing him under the bus first." "Where's Park now?" Margot asked. "In a meeting with 3 different attorneys, trying to figure out how much of this he can blame entirely on the Draegers." Priya's expression hardened. "It won't work. I've already got the financial trail showing he personally signed off on 3 of the Ridgeline Aviation contracts. He knew exactly what those delays were buying. And Walt?" Priya's expression shifted, careful now. "We don't have him yet. His truck was spotted leaving the burn site 40 minutes ago, headed toward Weaverville, and then it just stopped showing up on anything. No cameras, no plate readers, nothing." Renata, climbing down from the helicopter with her evidence kit secured under one arm, looked between them with the particular stillness of someone connecting facts faster than she liked. "Weaverville," she said slowly. "Isn't that where Cole's other property is? The one near the Trinity Alps cabin?" Margot felt the cold drop in her stomach return, sharper this time, because she already knew the answer before anyone said it out loud. "Eli's there," she said. "Cole sent him up to the cabin this morning with the household staff to keep him away from all of this while the investigation opened." She was already moving back toward the helicopter, adrenaline replacing whatever exhaustion had started creeping in after 2 days without real sleep. "If Walt Draeger just found out his whole operation is collapsing, and he knows exactly which family is responsible for collapsing it." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Priya was already calling Cole, and Renata was already climbing back into the helicopter without being asked, and Margot was already running the pre-flight checklist in her head faster than she'd ever run it before, because somewhere on a mountain 40 minutes away, a desperate man with nothing left to lose was driving toward the one thing that could still hurt the people who'd taken his family's 15-year secret away from him in a single afternoon. The flight to the Trinity Alps cabin took 11 minutes that felt like 11 hours. Margot flew it lower and faster than she'd flown anything since the day she'd raced a different fire to a different mountain, the ridgelines blurring past close enough that Renata, still in the back seat with her evidence kit clutched against her chest, stopped asking questions and just held on. Cole's voice came through on the radio, tight with a fear he wasn't bothering to manage anymore. "I've got the housekeeper on the line. She says Eli walked down to the creek an hour ago. Said he wanted to be alone for a while. She didn't think anything of it. He does that sometimes. Has she seen Walt Drager's truck anywhere near the property? No, but the creek trail comes out near the county access road. If he's looking for the easiest place to find someone alone, that's it." Margot's jaw tightened. "I'm 15 minutes out. Get the housekeeper to call him in. Now. Any excuse. Dinner, an emergency, anything. She's tried 3 times. He's not answering." 15-year-old boys didn't answer their phones for all kinds of ordinary reasons. Margot knew that. She also knew that ordinary reasons had stopped applying the moment Walt Drager's truck disappeared off every camera and plate reader between the burn site and Weaverville. She put the helicopter down in a clearing 200 yards from the cabin, close enough to the creek trail that she was running before the skids had fully settled. Renata shouting something behind her about waiting for backup that Margot didn't have time to acknowledge. The creek trail wound through stands of pine that hadn't burned yet, the light coming through in long gold streaks that would have been beautiful on any other afternoon. Margot moved through it the way she'd been trained to move through unfamiliar terrain a decade ago, fast and quiet, eyes reading the ground for anything that didn't belong. A broken branch, a footprint pressed deeper than wind alone would explain, the particular wrongness of silence where birds should have been calling. She found the footprints 200 yards up the trail. 2 sets. One sneaker tread she recognized from 3 weeks of watching Eli kick around the helipad. One boot tread, deep and uneven. The gait of an older man walking faster than was comfortable for him. She found them both 4 minutes later, in a clearing where the creek widened into a shallow pool. Eli backed against a fallen log, Walt Drager standing 6 feet away with the particular stillness of a man who'd run out of plans and was improvising with whatever desperation handed him. "Mr. Drager," Margot said, stepping into the clearing slow and deliberate, hands visible, voice pitched low, and even the way she'd learned to pitch it a long time ago in rooms where the wrong tone got people killed. "This isn't going to fix anything." Walt didn't turn around fast. He turned around like a man underwater, like every motion cost him something he didn't have left to spend. "Nothing's going to fix anything," he said. "My son's in custody. My company's finished. 40 years of work gone in one afternoon because some pilot decided to play detective. Your son delayed emergency response to a fire that nearly killed 4 people yesterday," Margot said. "You burned a mountain that killed my brother 2 years ago. Nobody did this to your family, Mr. Drager. You did this to yourself, a long time before I ever showed up." "I never touched the boy," Walt said, and something in his voice cracked at the edges. Less threat now, and more a man hearing himself for the first time in a long time and not liking the sound. "I just wanted somebody from that family to understand what it feels like, to have something taken away in one afternoon that took years to build." "I understand exactly what that feels like," Margot said quietly. "I've understood it for 2 years. The difference is, I didn't walk into the woods after a 15-year-old to make somebody else feel it too." Eli hadn't moved from the log, but his eyes had found Margot's the second she stepped into the clearing, and held there with a trust that landed in her chest harder than she expected. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. She'd told him once that she checked everything carefully because she'd seen what happened when somebody didn't, and now here she was, the thing she'd been checking for, finally standing in front of her in the worst possible form. "Walk toward me, Eli," Margot said, keeping her eyes on Walt the entire time. Slow. "Mr. Drager isn't going to do anything, because Mr. Drager already knows there's a helicopter, a forensic investigator, and very shortly a great deal of law enforcement converging on this exact clearing. And the only decision left for him to make is whether the next 20 minutes of his life involve a man who hurt a child or a man who didn't. Eli pushed up off the log slowly, never breaking eye contact with Margot, and started walking the long way around the clearing, giving Walt a wide berth that Margot had angled him toward without saying so directly. Walt watched him go and didn't move to stop him. Up close, in the gold afternoon light, he looked less like a threat and more like exactly what Margot had suspected back at the burn site. An old man who'd spent 15 years building something terrible on top of something ordinary and had finally run out of road. "I'm not going to hurt anybody," Walt said, mostly to himself. "I never wanted to hurt anybody. I just wanted it to matter, that I lost everything too." "It already matters," Margot said. "It's going to matter in a courtroom, where it should, not in these woods, with a kid who's already lost one parent to something nobody ever properly explained to him." Eli reached her side. Margot kept one arm out, steady, between him and Walt, and reached slowly for the radio clip to her vest with the other hand. "This is Reyes," she said into it, voice level. "We've located the boy. He's safe. Repeat, he's safe." Subject is cooperative and unarmed at this time, requesting ground units to clearing at Creek Trail Marker 4. Walt sat down heavily on the same fallen log Eli had just left, all the fight finally draining out of him at once, the way a fire burns itself down to coals once it's used up everything around it worth burning. 40 years, he said again, quieter this time, to nobody in particular. Margot didn't answer that. She kept her arm around Eli's shoulders instead, and waited for the sound of rotors and sirens that meant this part, at least, was finally, fully over. Cole found them 20 minutes later, running the last 100 yards from where he'd landed his own helicopter, reaching Eli before he'd fully stopped moving and pulling him into the kind of hug that fathers only give when they've spent the last 20 minutes genuinely afraid they wouldn't get the chance again. "I'm fine, Dad," Eli said into his shoulder. And then, in the specific tone of a teenager, determined not to let an emergency cancel his right to be annoyed about something, added, "Margot's the one who actually did anything. You can let go of me now." Cole laughed, a real one, startled out of him, the sound of a man who'd been holding his breath for far longer than the last 20 minutes and had finally found permission to release it. He let go of Eli and turned to Margot with an expression she didn't have a quick read on yet, something layered and complicated underneath the obvious relief. "You went into those woods alone," he said. "I didn't have time to wait for an escort. You could have been killed." "I've been in worse woods," Margot said, "with worse odds, for people I cared about a lot less than I care about your son." The sentence came out before she'd fully decided to say it, and she watched it land on Cole's face, the way truth sometimes lands before either person involved has fully agreed to hear it. He didn't say anything right away. He just looked at her, in the gold late afternoon light, with smoke still hanging faint on the horizon behind them, and something in his careful, managed exterior, the same exterior she'd watched crack twice now in 3 days, once with Park and once on this exact mountain, finally stepped aside completely. "Thank you," he said, "for bringing him back to me." "That's the job," Margot said. "I don't think it is," Cole said. "Not anymore." She didn't have a fast answer for that, which had started happening to her more often than she was entirely comfortable with, since she'd driven up this mountain 6 weeks ago, in a borrowed sense of confidence, and a 15-year-old truck. She let the silence sit instead, the way Danny used to tell her the good silences were the ones you didn't rush to fill. Law enforcement vehicles were already threading up the access road behind them, lights flashing through the trees, and somewhere behind all of it, Margot understood, the slow machinery of an actual investigation into her brother's death was finally, properly starting to turn. 3 weeks later, Margot stood in a county courthouse hallway in a blazer she'd actually bought for the occasion, watching through a half-open door as a federal prosecutor read a list of charges against Desmond Park that took nearly 4 full minutes to finish. Conspiracy, wire fraud, obstruction of emergency response operations, accessory charges tied to 2 wildfires, now confirmed as deliberately set, including the one that had killed Danny. Walt Draeger had taken a plea deal the week before, the kind that came with a long list of conditions and a sentence that would keep him out of the woods, literally and otherwise, for the rest of his life. He hadn't fought it. Margot got the sense, watching him in his one and only court appearance, that some small part of him had been relieved to finally stop running a secret he'd been carrying since before his son was old enough to help him carry it. Kurt Draeger was cooperating fully, in exchange for a reduced sentence, which was how the investigation had moved as fast as it had. Faster, Priya said, than she'd seen any case like this move in 20 years of practice. And in a quiet office 2 floors up, a detective named Hollis Reyna, who'd inherited cold cases for the county fire marshal's office, handed Margot a folder she'd been waiting 2 years to receive. Official reopening, Hollis said. Danny's case is being reclassified from accidental to homicide, pending final review. The accelerant signature Renata pulled off the Pinecrest site matches residue recovered from the original scene 2 years ago. Same chemical composition, same application pattern. It's not a coincidence. It's a signature. Whoever was lighting these fires for Walt Draeger back then was using the same method he used for every job since. Margot stood very still in the doorway, the folder in both hands, feeling something she hadn't let herself feel in 2 years. Not closure. Not yet. Not with a trial still ahead and answers still incomplete. But the door to it, finally, fully open. "Thank you," she said. "Thank the pilot who noticed a 40-minute delay pattern nobody else bothered tracking," Hollis said. "That's not usually how these things break open. Usually it takes a leak, or a confession, or 10 years of nobody caring enough to keep looking. You just looked at the paperwork and refused to stop." "I had a reason to refuse," Margot said, and didn't elaborate further, because Hollis's eyes had already drifted to the case number on the folder and didn't need the rest explained. She found Cole waiting outside the courthouse when she finally walked out into the afternoon light, leaning against his car instead of having someone drive him, which she'd noticed he'd started doing more often these last 3 weeks. Small, deliberate choices to be present in his own life instead of manage through it. "How'd it go?" he asked. "They're reopening Danny's case. Officially. Homicide, not accident." Cole exhaled like he'd been holding that particular breath since the day she'd first told him about her brother on the helipad of a burning fire station. "Margot, I'm glad. I mean that." "I know you do," she said, and found, to her own quiet surprise, that she believed it completely. They stood there for a moment in the parking lot, the kind of silence that had started happening between them more often since the cabin, since the woods, since the moment he'd told her "I don't think it is," and she hadn't had a fast answer ready. The kind of silence neither of them seemed to feel any urgent need to fill. "Eli's been asking when you're flying again," Cole said eventually. "He's decided your flying lessons with him are non-negotiable now. Apparently you promised him stick time on the next calm weather day, and he's been keeping a list of calm weather days since the cabin." "I did promise that," Margot admitted. "He earned it. Kid didn't panic once out there. Even with Draeger standing 6 feet away, he kept his head." "He gets that from his mother," Cole said quietly. "Not from me. I've never been good under that kind of pressure. I'm good at numbers and meetings and knowing exactly what to say to a room full of investors. I am not good at standing in a clearing with a man who might hurt my son." He looked at her, something open and unguarded in his face that she hadn't seen from him before this summer, not even in the careful, managed cracks of the worst 3 weeks of both their lives. "You are. You were built for exactly that moment. And somehow, you also know how to sit at a kitchen table answering a 15-year-old's questions about shipping containers, like it's the most important meeting of your day." "It probably is the most important meeting of my day," Margot said. "Most days, anyway." "I want to ask you something," Cole said. "And I want you to know you can say no, and nothing about your job changes if you do." "Ask. Stay," he said simply. "Not just as the pilot, though, God knows, I'd hire you back as the pilot 100 times over, even if this was the only conversation we ever had. I mean, stay, in whatever way makes sense to you. Eli already thinks you're the most important person who's walked into our lives in years, and I think he might actually be right. And I've spent 3 weeks trying to figure out how to say that without making it sound like a business proposal, and I don't think I've managed it. because apparently that's not a thing I know how to do gracefully." Margot looked at him for a long moment. This careful, guarded man who'd cracked open slowly over the worst 3 weeks of both their lives, who kept his grief filed away the same methodical way she used to file hers, who'd raised a boy with more honesty in him than most adults managed in a lifetime. "I came up this mountain 6 weeks ago because I needed a paycheck," she said. "I didn't expect to find out who set the fire that killed my brother. I definitely didn't expect to find a 15-year-old who interrogates me about flight manifests at breakfast, or a boss who asks me honest questions instead of comfortable ones." She paused, feeling the weight of the next sentence before she said it, the way she'd learned to feel out every decision that mattered before committing to it out loud. "I'm not very good at staying anywhere, Adrian. I've spent my whole adult life ready to leave the second something got complicated, because leaving was always safer than finding out whether something complicated was worth keeping. And now?" he asked. "Now I think I might have finally run out of places that need me more than this one does," she said. It wasn't a yes, not exactly, not yet, but it wasn't a no either, and Cole seemed to understand the difference, because something in his shoulders finally, fully relaxed, the way a man's shoulders relax when a question he's been carrying for weeks gets an answer he can actually live with. "Eli's going to want that in writing," he said. "He keeps a list, remember." Margot laughed, a real one, surprised out of her, the first one in longer than she wanted to admit. "Tell him I'll start with Tuesday's flying lesson. We'll call it a verbal commitment until I figure out the rest." "I can work with a verbal commitment," Cole said. "I run a company on slightly less than that most days." They drove back up the mountain together as the afternoon light went long and gold over the ridgelines. The same ridgelines that had nearly killed 4 people 3 weeks ago. The same mountains that had taken her brother 2 years before that. The fire scars were still visible from the road. Black scrub against green hillside. A wound the land would spend years healing from, the way Margot herself was only now starting to. But somewhere behind them, in a courthouse 2 counties over, a case file with her brother's name on it had finally, officially reopened. And somewhere ahead of them, at the top of a mountain road she'd once driven up praying for nothing more complicated than a paycheck, a 15-year-old boy was waiting with a stopwatch and a list of calm weather days, ready to hold her to a promise she intended, for the first time in longer than she could remember, to actually keep. She thought about Danny the way she always did in quiet moments now, not with the sharp, unanswerable grief of the last 2 years, but with something steadier underneath it. The particular relief of a woman who had spent 2 years carrying a question nobody would help her ask out loud, and had finally, somehow, found the people willing to ask it with her. She had come up this mountain looking for a job. She was driving back up it now. She understood slowly, looking at the man beside her, and thinking about the boy waiting at the top, having found something considerably harder to explain on any job application, and considerably more worth staying for. Don't go anywhere just yet. You've got 2 more incredible stories waiting right here on your screen. If this one hit home, tap to watch the next, and make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on. Oh, and before you jump, drop your city in the comments. I love seeing exactly where you're all watching from.